So today I want to talk about a very bizarre aspect of the world we live in. I want to talk about the gates of hell. I want to talk about artificial intelligence and cannibalism. But to start, I want to talk about a very strange quality of life, the texture of the world that we live in. It feels to many as though we have become unstuck from time, that the promises of progress made to us in the past have fallen flat and we exist in a kind of limbo. It feels as though these promises have turned to ash in our hands and are slipping through our fingers. What comes to mind is a skit from a Family Guy episode where Brian and Stewie travel to the future by 20 years. When they arrive, Brian notes that it's just brick buildings and large advertisements and homeless people. He turns to Stewie and says, "What happened? Where are all of the flying cars?" Stewie says, "Well, look, it's only 20 years in the future. What exactly did you expect to happen?" Many of us have this same question. Isn't it supposed to be the future? You only need to look back to the original Star Wars trilogy to see an incredibly optimistic and an incredibly sincere depiction of the future. It's notable also that it's a very Eurocentric and very white view of the future. This positive future is accompanied by technology that is very, very different to the technology that populates our world. Everything in Star Wars is kind of analog. It's these squeaky noises. It's these turning knobs and levers. It's these very basic graphic projection computers. Everything is analog. You can see within Star Wars the optimism about technology within the 70s and 80s as it shares its aesthetics with analog forms of early computers that existed then. This is contrasted with the bizarre and unhuman form of hyper-reality, these social networks of constant distraction accessed through minimalist blocks that reflect our faces back at us, where technology is used to find ever more intrusive ways to advertise to us and access ever more elaborate ways to feed our desires and fuel our distraction. The hyper-reality is not organic or warm, it's sterile. It's also worth noting that in the original Star Wars movies, there is no consumerism. There are no advertisements. People do not watch television or other forms of entertainment. There are no consumer products. There are no massive billboards polluting their city skylines. Be the characters wandering through the desolate Wild West of the desert planets, or on a rebel base, or in the Death Star, or walking through massive technical edifices of a mining facility, or through the metropolitan cities. They are never interrupted by propagandistic messaging for material consumption. There are almost no private corporations even mentioned in the original trilogy, even though it's technically set in the past. These movies have within them the assumption that the future is an endless expanse of potentiality for human flourishing. Outside of these pseudo-scientific cults for the population of Mars, this attitude has been eradicated from our current era. But why is this? Well, to understand this, I want to talk about the second topic, and that is AI and cannibalism. Well, first off, what is AI and how does it work? So AI is basically just a very complex and sophisticated form of recombination of search queries from large data sources. When the AI does this, it has no understanding of what it is producing, which is very obvious when it produces nonsense, or it makes mistakes, or misunderstands what it is that you're asking of it. It has no internal state, and thus has no form of actual understanding. We then see how ridiculous it is, the idea that AI could take over. Let's think, for example, in the field of food reviews. Imagine 100% of all of the world's food reviews were written by AI. Well, in 20 years from now, the only food reviews that could be relevant, that it would call upon from its data source to recombine into a new article, a new review of a new restaurant, would be other reviews created by AI or created by itself. So AI has a parasitic relationship with the real and authentic intelligence of human beings. in addition to a parasitic relationship with large amounts of data farmed from individuals on the web. Even with this, any of the results it produces needs to be curated by a human intelligence and understanding, as it often makes mistakes of inference. And this problem of inference is the key of a big challenge and a big crisis within AI at this moment. AI is becoming less and less accurate with each generation. But why is this? We're told that the more that the machine, quote, learns from bigger sets of data, the more, quote, intelligent it becomes. But this is not true. As the AI matures into later generations, much of the data that it draws upon are results of its own processes or the processes of other AIs. That's not to mention the amount of material that already exists out there that has been produced by AI that we're just not aware of. The more that AI outputs become part of an AI input, the worse and worse the results that it produces become, until eventually this problem of inference ends up compounding and you end up with absolute nonsense. You end up in a situation where you have a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. What ends up in the final result are the imperfections and the artifacts of the process, where the original image, which is the human understanding that embedded within language, is completely erased. This happens remarkably fast with AI, just showing how superficially impressive it actually is. It's because of this that AI will never take over any field, and will only be able to produce subpar results that will have to be curated by human beings who work in that specific field. The mind that exists inside an AI is really just a black hole of meaninglessness that constantly eats itself. Once we understand this, we might understand something deeper about the technological age in which we live. AI as an avatar of material technical progress illustrates a dark truth about the entire technological system in which we live. The liberal West is one massive machine, a massive machine with nothing at its heart, nothing at its center, just a black hole that eats itself. This form of self-cannibalism can be seen within the Star Wars movies themselves. Going back and looking at the originals, the modern movies stand in stark contrast as pure vehicles for consumer product. There is almost nothing of any artistic value within them. They are just pure pieces of franchised property. The anti-white and anti-male politics is really just insult added to injury. As the technological and financial apparatus grows more and more sophisticated for producing pieces of media, and as the monopoly of smaller and smaller conglomerates of studios emerge, risk is eliminated from the process. It does not matter that most people are unsatisfied by the results. The intellectual properties are flogged for all of the money that they are worth. And just as the AI produces a copy of a copy of a copy, the myths of Europeans, the ancient fantasy that Star Wars draws upon, is retold and retold and retold. But each time, the heart of the work, the true human meaning at the very center of it, is degraded, and what we are left with is the artificial artifacts of its creation, the ugly side effects of the industrial process that produced it. We keep telling ourselves the same stories over and over again, but each time with less meaning. You can see this also in the cannibalism of fashion. What is the fashion among Zoomers now? It's a late 1990s, early 2000s fashion. And you even see now forms of mid-2000s or late 2000s fashions being recombined. The rate of self-cannibalization is accelerating. You can see this even in pop music, where samples that would have been made from 10, 20, 30 years ago are now being made from 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. Songs that were only just in the charts are now being sampled and remixed. As the technological systems of information distribution grow more and more complex, the turnover of culture becomes faster and faster. Elton John has topped the charts with several songs with nothing original. They're merely remixes and remakes of his old songs with modern celebrities added on for marketing purposes. And all this is done with an ironic form of detachment. The straight-faced sincerity of the futurism of past decades seems bizarre to us in a world where everything has to be placed within inverted commas. It is not just that our world is populated by cameras that see us at all times. There is one camera that can never be turned off, the camera that exists within our own minds. This form of self-aware detachment alienates us from authentic forms of being and separates us from embedded identities such as our race, our family, our nation, and our faith. The technological beast created by liberal modernity is like Hieronymus Bosch's mouth of hell. It is one massive mouth whose appetite can never ever be quenched. Not satisfied with eating the souls of Westerners, it has constructed one of the most predatory and scandalous human trafficking organizations to funnel as many human souls as possible from the third world into its dead and materialist jaws. As all forms of faith have been eradicated from public life, and religion has been mocked and degraded, and as spiritual meaning is denied to us, Western civilization has become like this AI, a technological marvel with nothing but a black void at its center, whose hunger can never ever be satisfied. But will this demon consume the entire world? Well, I'm not entirely convinced of it. There is a technical limit to the progress of technology. Technocratic progress has been so convincing to many because the social decline that it creates happens at a slower rate than the convenience that it offers. Thereby, it can constantly claim a form of moral supremacy. This has simply reached its limit. It's running out. And this is why we feel unstuck from history. We feel unmarred. Another problem with this also is that the people who are trafficked into the West, unlike the host class that created this system, are incapable of sustaining it. They don't possess the cultural or intellectual capital to maintain the complex systems needed for liberal Western materialism to persist into the future. As indigenous Westerners that oppose this form of being, it's our job to play a kind of waiting game. We must look to those around us to form communities of strength that can weather the coming storms so that we might escape the clutches of the mouth of hell.